We hear a ton of talk these days about corporate sustainability and reducing an environmental footprint. But honestly, how often do we actually get to peek under the hood and see the raw machinery of how that is measured? Well, today we're diving into the waste management industry to do exactly that. We're going to see how corporate accountability for air quality actually works on paper, using the precise, hard metrics that force these companies to show their math.
For this explainer, we're pulling straight from the SASB standards, specifically the Infrastructure Sector Standard for Waste Management. Now, this isn't just some voluntary pledge or a glossy marketing brochure. In fact, as of 2022, the International Sustainability Standards Board actually assumed responsibility for these exact standards. So regulators and investors all over the world use this framework to measure and compare corporate sustainability. It's essentially the gold standard for how companies must disclose their environmental risks.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the air we breathe. Second, measuring the pollutants. Third, proximity to people. Fourth, the price of noncompliance. And finally, the accountability dashboard.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the air we breathe, the stakes and the sources. Before we get into the spreadsheets and the metric codes, we really need to understand what we're talking about here. Under this standard, air pollution is not just some vague concept of invisible smog. It's explicitly defined as the presence of air contaminants that might injure humans, animals, plants, or property. But it also explicitly includes contaminants that interfere with the enjoyment of life or property. That means odors and toxic gases, especially those pouring directly out of landfills, landfill fires, waste incinerators, and treatment plants, are all strictly classified as air pollution.
So why does this matter to the bottom line? Well, failing to manage these emissions carries absolutely massive financial and operational consequences. Companies that don't proactively control their atmospheric footprint are looking at mandatory capital expenditures to upgrade their tech, skyrocketing daily operating costs, heavy regulatory fines, and even direct lawsuits from affected communities. Poor air quality management can literally cost a company its license to operate.
Moving on to Section 2, measuring the pollutants, the Big Four.
We know why it matters, but how is it quantified? Well, the standard introduces a specific metric code, IFH-WM 120A1. This is the exact line item demanding quantitative measurement of direct air emissions. Companies can't just wave their hands and say they're reducing emissions. No, they have to report the raw data of what they are releasing from all of their activities. That means stationary facilities, mobile sources, and their entire transportation fleets.
Here is the core methodology. The standard forces companies to track 4 very specific categories of pollutants. We've got oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, oxides of sulfur, or SOx, volatile organic compounds, and hazardous air pollutants. And notice the unit of measure. Every single one of these has to be measured and reported in metric tons. It's a pure, unavoidable mass balance of exactly what is being pumped out into the atmosphere.
Let's unpack a couple of the trickier ones on that list, starting with VOCs. The standard carefully defines volatile organic compounds as any compound of carbon that participates in atmospheric photochemical reactions. Interestingly enough, they specifically exclude carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and methane from this definition. Why? Because they want to ensure the focus remains squarely on those highly reactive carbon compounds that are responsible for creating ground-level ozone and smog.
And then there's HAPs, or hazardous air pollutants. Honestly, the legal definition provided by the standard here is incredibly sobering. These are pollutants known or suspected to cause cancer, reproductive effects, birth defects, or severe environmental damage. When a waste management company is reporting this metric, they are telling the public exactly how many metric tons of cancer-causing or birth defect-causing agents they released into the air that year. It brings a pretty profound gravity to the data, doesn't it?
All right, Section 3, proximity to people, the human radius.
It's one thing to know how many metric tons of pollutants are in the air. It's an entirely different thing to know who is actually breathing them. That brings us to our next metric, IFWM 120A.2. This one forces a company to disclose the total number of its facilities, including active landfills, closed landfills, and waste-to-energy plants that sit in or near areas of dense population. But what exactly counts as a dense population? The standard doesn't leave this up to guesswork. It defines an urbanized area as a densely developed residential, commercial, or non-residential area with a population of more than 50,000 people. And here is where it gets super interesting, the radius rule. The standard explicitly states that if a facility's boundary is within 5 kilometers of one of those urbanized areas, it has to be counted. Picture a 5-kilometer radius around your own home. If there's an active landfill or a waste incinerator inside that circle, you are considered part of the exposed population, highly likely to come into contact with all those metric tons of emissions and odors we just talked about. It mathematically links the pollution directly to the people.
Which leads us to Section 4, the price of non-compliance, rule-breaking revealed.
So, what happens when a company crosses the legal line? Enter metric IFW-120A. 3. You can think of this as the ultimate truth serum for a company's environmental record. It demands a pure, quantitative count of every single incident of non-compliance associated with air quality permits, standards, and regulations.
They have to disclose the whole shebang. All violations must be counted, regardless of how they were measured or how often they happened. They have to track exceedances of continuous emissions, like daily or weekly averages. They have to track non-continuous, sudden spikes. They even have to report if they were caught doing false or inaccurate reporting, or failing to get a permit in the first place. And remember how we defined air pollution earlier? Yep, they absolutely have to count incidents of non-compliance associated with odor, whether it resulted in a polite warning letter or a massive fine.
Plus, companies must report failures across two totally distinct categories. First, they report violations of technology-based standards, meaning the physical equipment or pollution scrubbers at the site just broke down. And second, they report exceedances of quality-based standards, meaning the actual quality of the air in the surrounding environment crossed a toxic threshold, regardless of whether the equipment was running or not. Literally no loopholes here. Finally, Section 5, the accountability dashboard, tying it all together.
When you stack these three metrics together, you get a brilliantly logical system for corporate transparency. Step 1. Tell us exactly what you emit, NOx, SOx, VOCs, and HAPs in metric tons. Step 2. Tell us exactly how many of your sites are within a 5-kilometer radius of a human population of 50,000 or more. Step 3. Tell us exactly how many times you broke the rules, failed your technology, or caused an odor incident. It forces a complete, totally unavoidable picture of a company's atmospheric footprint. You know, when investors and regulators force this level of hard, mathematical transparency, companies just can't hide behind greenwashing anymore. They have to manage what they measure. So I'll leave you with this. How might this kind of mandatory corporate transparency completely reshape the air quality, the health, and the environment right in your own community over the next decade? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions and always, always look at the data.